Okay, so welcome everybody. We'll get started. So as we jump in today, for those that didn't join or weren't able to make our last community meeting, what we'll do is we're going to run through the issue that we had created in the repository that lists out various different topics that people wanted to talk to. I'm just pasting a copy of it into chat now in case you've not seen it. So this is where we're going to drive the meeting from. But before we jump into that, just to do a little bit of kind of housekeeping and a couple of things just to announce and talk to. Just let me share my screen. Which tab do I want to share? That window. Okay. Hopefully you can all see my screen.
Yes.
Let me make it a little bit bigger. So the first thing I wanted to do before we jumped into the bulk of the topics today was actually just to say a big thank you to the community. Yesterday, we celebrated our 1-year anniversary of going open source with Backstage. And the project has gone from what started in a hack week to get us going with open source a year ago, March 16th last year, all the way through to today, where we have hundreds of contributors, 250 plus contributors at the end of last year, and thousands, over 8,000 commits again towards the end of last year. And we have a fantastic community. Thanks to you all who've been there in the community, supporting each other, helping us kind of decide how we can take the project forward and drive things to support a bigger and bigger audience. So just before we jump into the main kind of topics for today, I just wanted to say thank you for all of that support, all of the work that the community's been doing. You guys are great, and we love having you here and being part of the project. So thank you, everybody. So that was the first thing to call out. A couple of housekeeping bits and pieces as we go through. So you may have seen today, though I think it's fairly, I'm just going to refresh it to see if anything has come up. Oh, we've got one. Fantastic. Thank you, Himanshu, for jumping in there. We have enabled discussions in our project. So under the main repository, you'll now see this new discussions tab. This is something that we're trialing out now amongst the maintainers and the sponsors, and it's open to the community too. We wanted a place where some of the great questions and great answers that have been coming up in Discord to live a little more permanently, to help out the community and make it easier to find. Because what we found, particularly with Discord, is it just gets lost a little bit perhaps into the history. And oftentimes we get similar questions coming up that could be more easily found. So this is something that we're just trialing out now. It's there. You'll see more and more information coming into here. Please give it a try yourselves to see how you like it, but hopefully it becomes another way that we can just more easily kind of communicate and kind of share some of that knowledge. So those were the two main things to call out up at the top. As mentioned, the issue I shared in chat, this is what we're going to run through today. So today we're going to have a little bit of a presentation discussion from the chaps at Expedia, talking about their journey and how like they introduced Backstage and everything. We're going to hear from Tyson Singer. So he's our VP and head of Spotify platform. He's going to talk to us a little bit about just our open source approach at Spotify and what we've done. And then we've got a few other questions, some updates on RFCs that we can do from the maintainers. We'll run through the rest of this list. If there are any other questions or things that you'd like to discuss or ask about, please feel free to continue to add them to the issue or drop those questions into the chat in the Zoom chat. We'll keep an eye out. We'll call out the questions as we can and run through those answers. So to kick things off, What I wanted to do is just to start out with Tyson, if that's okay, and then we'll drop across to the Expedia peeps to hear a little bit how they've been working with Backstage and adopting for them. So to hand over, Tyson, over to you.
Thanks, Lee. So I'll just quickly introduce myself. I started at Spotify about 4 years ago. And as Lee said, I lead an organization called Platform, which has our infrastructure teams and a lot of the shared platforms that are used by our company. And the people that we serve are primarily engineers, but it's also designers, data scientists. And part of that department has the folks who have built Backstage, both directly and indirectly. So that's my primary role. Also, I serve in a sort of CTO-like role. We don't actually have a CTO. We have a committee of folks who make up the CTO function, and I'm the chairperson for that. And so I'm the practice lead for tech. My background is as an engineer. So I'm quite passionate about technology. I'll leave it at that for my intro. What I'd like to do today is share a little bit about Spotify's open source journey. And the reason I want to share that with you is because I want to leave you with the why we are really committed to Backstage. So that journey started, it looks like, about 10 years and 1 week ago, when we released our first open source project into GitHub. We're a 14-year-old company, so maybe we're a little bit a late bloomer, but it seems sort of reasonable in terms of the amount of time it took us to contribute our first project. And so I want to talk a little bit about what we did right when we got started up till about 3 years ago. So what we did right is we created the permission and sort of the basic encouragement for folks to contribute into the open source ecosystem. And to a large extent, I think that succeeded. Today, we have 150 different projects that we've shared out there. We set up, and this all came from grassroots, a FOSS board, which was staffed by some of our most passionate engineers around open source software. And so of those projects, we saw that we had really just maybe 1 or 2 handfuls that had been hits, but that felt good. We should be putting things out there and seeing whether or not they stick or not. So what's I think more interesting is what we left on the table with that first approach. So there wasn't really any strategy behind it. It was very opportunistic, and it was really purely driven by the passion of our engineers, without any organizational support or explicit funding. And that left with our developers this tension between whether they should be servicing our internal needs or external needs, and not really any guidance on or ways of reasoning about how to balance those. And so for me, that felt like that was putting tension on the wrong people in the wrong ways, because it's tension between doing 2 good things and having to sort of solve that themselves. So about 3 years ago, we stepped back and we asked the most important question, which is, why are we doing this in the first place? And of course, the easy answers come back, which is we need to give back and we need to be good to the community, because we are participating in the open source ecosystem as users, and our engineers get inspired by doing this. They want to make contributions that are bigger than the Spotify box. But that wasn't really the depth of the answer that we were looking for. And about that same time, we'd also set a North Star goal for the platform organization. And it wasn't really just for my organization, but really on behalf of all Spotify tech. And that was that we wanted to become one of the top 10 regarded technology companies in the world. And so then the question again is, why did we want to do that? We didn't want to do that to stroke our own egos and say, yay, we're number 7, because humility is really, I think, an important part of our culture. It's what helps fuel the learning focused culture that we have. It is fundamental to that. So of course we wanted to do it because we wanted to attract new talent. Spotify was and still is known for the ways of working that we have. The Spotify model is quite well known, but we weren't really known for our actual tech. And we had amazing tech at the time and still do. We also wanted to do it because we wanted to have influence over our vendors, particularly our cloud vendors, because this is about the time that we shifted to using the cloud instead of our internally hosted solution. But that's a whole nother story, so I'm not going to elaborate on that. But most of all, what we wanted to do is we wanted to end the cycle of Spotifyers building great stuff, but not really sharing it out to the world because they didn't have the necessary support and we didn't have the intentionality behind that. And then having to replace it when the power of the open source model in the community came up with something as good or better, and then it became the new standard. And so we saw this pattern sort of happening time over time. So we built this thing called Helios quite a while ago. It's replaced by Kubernetes today. And going through the process of keeping your technology stack up to par with all these things that are going on is quite an expensive thing to do. And so this is one of the core motivators for us relative to our premier open source project, which is Backstage. And I'll elaborate a little bit more on that in a second. So great, we had a goal, this North Star goal. To set the foundations for that, we knew we had to do a number of things. And to mention a few. First, we were historically an infrastructure organization, so we knew we needed to realign that organization towards a customer-centric organization. And the customer for us is primarily the developer, and we needed to understand them more quantitatively and more qualitatively. So we decided we need to change some of the investments that we made. We started to invest more in user researchers and user experience and product insights folks and all the different variants of designers. We needed to be better at developer advocacy. And so we did more embedding with our customers, and we had our customers embed with us more to come see what we were doing. And we realized we needed a product marketing function, which is sort of unusual, I think, in an internally facing organization. But we knew we needed to do that because we knew we had to be better at communicating to our engineers and our data scientists and designers about using our products than we were today, because we were seeing some of the tension points there. All of these were important pre-steps before we went outside of Spotify. We needed to get good at these things internally. So we did that, and we got better. Then we took the next step, which was to open up an OSPO, an open source program office. And this helped us create more intentionality around all the different aspects of open sourcing. So before we were kind of just the shotgun approach, lots of stuff, put it out there, see what sticks. We set up a tiering system for our projects, with tier 1 projects getting the most explicit organizational support, and tier 3 projects being sort of more the independent incubator. You don't get a lot of central support. For those tier 1 projects, the way that we thought about those was this. We knew that we needed to have those set up to have a good market fit. So that was one aspect. And then the other aspect is what I alluded to before, which is we wanted the tier 1 products to be the ones that we really didn't want to be overshadowed by an external product, whether that's commercial or open source, and avoid that replacing technology cycle all the time that we've been faced with in those companies have. And Backstage is the backbone of our development model and our technology ecosystem. It's foundational to everything, so we really don't want to replace it. And yet at the time when we were sort of doing this, it wasn't really ready to be open sourced until that fateful hack week a year ago, where we had some amazing and passionate engineers, I think some of whom were probably on the call, who said, hey, let's make this thing ready to externalize. And they did that. And Then we had all the three sort of elements of success that we were looking for, which is we saw we had a market fit, we had a product that we could externalize, and it fit to our core strategy, which is put your premier projects out there so that they don't get deprecated in the long term. And then what we did was something that made us a bit uncomfortable, which is we've just moved fast and we open sourced it and threw it out in the community. And that was something that turned out to be quite a good decision. It was not obvious to us that that was a good decision, but the reason it feels like a good decision is because of what all of you did, is you engaged. And that's been so powerful for us to see things that we couldn't see before and to make contributions that we couldn't do on our own. And so this project is now basically the premier tier 1 project. It's the model for tier 1 projects in our open source ecosystem. And we've layered on this additional support for one of the problems I mentioned earlier, which is this tension between how do we balance internal and external needs, because we have separate teams that are focused on that. And they're separate-ish, I would say, in that they're pretty tightly coordinated, but that we've been thoughtful about how we want to create the incentives and focus for people in the organization. So that was my hopefully pretty quick pitch as to why open source is really important for Spotify and why Backstage is really the center of that. And it's going to stay there because we don't want to replace it. And it fits with our overall technology strategy. And so I just want to thank you all again for your ongoing support for Backstage. It means an awful lot to us. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, I don't see any questions coming up just yet. So please, if you do have, please add them into the chat. Tyson, if you're around, that's fantastic. If not, we can, I promise we'll get those questions across to you so that we can come back to the community and ask. If you are interested in the interim, Tyson, you made a fantastic blog post actually that went up yesterday on our engineering@spotify.com address. I'm just grabbing the link on our engineering blog. So please feel free to go and have a look at that. That tells you a little bit more about like the Backstage side of that journey and where that went. And then obviously for kind of future stuff, we have the roadmap is up on Backstage.io as well. So thank you, Tyson. Oh, okay, sorry, we did get one question just come through. If the open source code base is significantly different to the internal one, is there a plan or fear of replacing the internal tool with the open source one? So I can take a first stab at that one, and then feel free others to jump in. So right now, so when we open sourced, we did take a lot of like existing Backstage, if you will, from Spotify, mostly the front end, and put that out into the community. There is a big difference when it comes to the back end of the project. Externally in the open source project, you've seen it in Node.js. Internally, we run that in Java. And it's quite different in places. What happened when we open sourced was Backstage internal was intertwined with a lot of different kind of Spotify things that we didn't think was going to be as valuable for the external community. Not everybody wants to curate playlists, as an example, and things like that. So as Tyson said, we on a hack week, we decided, right, we're going to kind of strip this back, start afresh in certain areas, and how do we get this out there and working it together? Right now, we do have two teams, one team dedicated to the open source, one dedicated to the internal, and we are working to bring those projects together. Spotify, just like anybody else as adopters, we are an adopter of our open source project, and we want to be that longer term. So that's ongoing work right now. So yes, there are differences, but we are working to close those out and bring the code base together. What's the future? So from Julio, what's the future of Backstage at Spotify business-wise? Do you have any plans on increasing, reducing the investment, headcount, etc., to maintain the platform? What about monetizing on it? I might throw that one to you, Tyson.
Yeah, so from an investment perspective, we have added headcount towards the investment, and we are hiring and trying to fill in those positions because of this strong belief that we have. We also have a strong belief that successful open source projects have a strong commercial ecosystem around them. We've been sort of looking at some of the leading projects there. So we do want to support that commercial ecosystem, and so we're doing what we can to make that that true.
Hey, cool. Lou, JB, sorry if I get these wrong. What are the factors such as risks, concerns that a company should consider when assessing whether or not to adopt Backstage? So I can from a value add perspective, or sorry, from a perspective of when you're kind of looking at, is this right for us or not? One thing that I find I have a lot of conversations with potential adopters is, what's the value proposition? What's the pain point, the problem, the difficulties that you're looking to solve? And then we can look and see if Backstage maps right for your situation. Quite often I get the question of, how do I get what Spotify's got? We heard at Spotify you've got like over 100 plugins. How do I get that? And rather than focusing on that, like the setup for Spotify engineers, we built it and kind of customized plugins and all sorts of things to make it work right for us. And the hope is that you can do the same for your own organization. So the thing that springs to mind for myself is, what's the pain point, what's the problem, what's the challenge that you're trying to solve with Backstage? And then look at the core parts of Backstage. Look at the software catalog, look at the scaffolder, look at the extensibility with plugins or the discoverability, and pick like the problem where you can add the most value and start with that and build on from there would be mine. I don't know if any others have.
I would add one thing. Yeah, I would add one thing to that, Lee. I think like we've had the pleasure of talking to so many of you, which has been amazing, and kind of seeing people try and roll it out in different ways. And I think to Lee's point, like the biggest risk is trying to do too much from the beginning. I think the biggest thing is start really small, start really narrow, start with one particular thing that your company needs. And even start with maybe like one team or two teams that will actually benefit from Backstage, and roll it out to them. Like roll out a solution that narrowly solves a problem for a small customer base, and then expand. Because I think the biggest risk is the opportunity cost of you as an engineer not focusing on the things that are most impactful. And if you start to build this massive thing without getting buy-in, I think then the risk is that your time is not maximized. So to me, I would just the biggest risk is trying to do too much. Is candidly what I think we've seen across different companies.
Okay, let's take this last one in chat, and then I want to hand over to Eric and the team at Expedia, and then we'll come back to chat post that to answer some more. So this one I'm going to throw to the maintainers actually. So this is from Woody. A question a bit close to Julio's. Is there a plan at Spotify to use Backstage as a way to provide APIs to external entities, an opened developer portal?
Could talk about it from the point of view of kind of having that capability within Backstage. Whether we use it at Spotify or not, I'm not sure. It's a different team. But building the capability, kind of the control plane capability of that into Backstage itself is probably unlikely. Although we do want, the flexibility to be able to build something like that as a plugin, and kind of have the Chrome around Backstage also be flexible enough that you can build the Chrome that you would want for a customer facing, world facing potentially portal as well. So we want it to be possible. We probably won't build it in as a core feature.
we'll post a message in the chat in a few minutes to figure this out.
Thanks, Himanshu. Okay, well, while we're working on that, Eric and team, to hand over to you and to hear a little bit more about how you introduced Backstage at Expedia Group.
Right, let me hand over to my colleagues that is on the call here, which is Mike Turner and Guillermo, that they will be doing this presentation today. Over to you, Mike.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. Yeah, what we'll talk about is our journey to get to Backstage at Expedia Group. Just a quick intro. My name is Mike. I am the product manager for Backstage, along with my technology counterparts, Eric and Guillermo, as well as Carrie, who is also on the product side. So we're on the call today. We'll be talking to you about Backstage and our journey. So with that, I'm going to just jump in real quick here. And we'll talk a little bit about the background of Expedia and what our ecosystem looks like today and where we want to be with it. We'll talk a little bit about how we arrived at making the decision to choose Backstage. We'll talk a little bit about the benefits that we see that Backstage is bringing to Expedia Group. And then Guillermo's going to talk about where we are, how far we've gotten with our adoption of Backstage, and where we plan to head in the future. So with that, I'll jump right in. For those of you that are aware of Expedia, it's a little bit over 20 years old now. The company in that time has acquired a number of brand subsidiaries. So things you may not know about Expedia is that in addition to brand Expedia, we have things like hotels.com, BRBO, Travelocity, Agencia, Hotwire, Orbitz, the list goes on. But as you might imagine, because we have all these brands that have been acquired over time, you get a lot of silos, right? And so within the context of the developer ecosystem, we have a ton of silos and a ton of duplication. Now, as a specific example of this, imagine that you're looking for a hotel search. Well, it turns out that Hotwire's got a stack for that, Orbitz has a stack for that, Hotels has a stack for that, so on and so forth. And so you have a lot of duplication across these things. So when we start looking at Expedia Group holistically, that's when we start realizing how complex our ecosystem is. Just to give you all some numbers, within the context of EG itself, we have roughly 20,000 applications. We have over 350 developer tools that are necessary to build those things. We have an estimated 3,000 APIs. We don't know for sure, but this is why we're building Backstage. And then probably, in the order of something like 1,000 libraries. And then we've got a ton of documentation that's spread out over things like ServiceNow, Confluence, so on and so forth, right? And so our objective at Expedia was really twofold. One, it was to simplify our developer ecosystem and deduplicate things. And two, it was to help developers become more efficient at A, onboarding into Expedia, and B, really becoming more efficient at delivering value for our customers and our partners, not worrying about how to build things, where that's a challenge today. So how do we arrive at Backstage, right? So part of what I was just talking about was we actually started this journey in 2019. So it's about 3 years that we've been on this journey. And what we started out with was looking externally, right? So we were looking at EG and we said, hey, what if we wanted to provide platform APIs to our customers and our partners? And we started looking at an external developer hub and said, hey, what's the external developer hub experience going to look like at EG? What we studied was we looked at companies like Shopify, Stripe, Magento, eBay, LinkedIn, AWS, so on and so forth, to kind of figure out how we wanted that two-sided platform to look. In the context of doing that analysis, what we found out is EG actually operates multiple external customer-facing, developer-facing portals. It's something like 10 plus across EG. They're all custom built. They all do things a little bit different, and the experience isn't consistent across those things for developers. Right? So we knew that we needed to start deduplicating and providing a consistent customer experience for our external developers. And so where that led us was it led us on an inward journey where we said, you know what, in order for us to provide a consistent experience externally for our customers and partners, we actually have to simplify our internal developer ecosystem first. So that led us into what we call our developer front door. And that's really about this two-sided internal marketplace that enables developers to easily contribute things like APIs, tools, services, and it allows developers who want to build something to actually discover those and build on top of them, right? So we looked at things like Spotify's Backstage, we looked at Google Cloud, we had a whole slew of homegrown systems that were really customized around maybe one or two specific functions, but didn't really give us what we needed. And so what we learned during this analysis was search and discovery capabilities that optimize consumption and productivity are super important. Having a plugin model that we can inner source so that developers of tools and services can actually build their plugins within Backstage became very relevant. And then finally, providing transparency into app tool and API performance was super key. We want to be able to provide a way that developers can come to a catalog, they can discover things, and they can understand whether they're, good or not, right? So they can consume them. So all of that to say, that led us down the path of starting out with a really humble beginning, which was just starting to look at our developer tools. So we started with developer tools and we said, hey, we have 350 of these developer tools. How do we simplify the developer tooling ecosystem? But then that led us into so much more, which was really around these three kind of tenets, right? We wanted to simplify discovery and contribution. And so, for our consumers, we wanted to be able to allow developers to discover, e.g., developer-facing services, tools, and APIs. We have mapped those things within Expedia to what we call domains and capabilities. And so for a specific domain and capability, a developer can come in and say, I want to look at the respective tools, services, and APIs that are associated to a domain or capability, and they can discover those very easily. They can consume them or build on top of them. Also, as a developer, they want to access up-to-date relevant documentation. So this is where we really started out. Our early MVP was really just centered around Techdocs and actually getting documents as code for our applications. And then finally,
Hey, Mike, I really apologize to jump in for this. Unfortunately, there's been a bit of an issue with Zoom, and we're going to have to jump to a new call, I'm afraid. Himanshu has just dropped the link into chat. Oh, okay, scratch that. I didn't say anything.
Wow.
This meeting has just been upgraded automatically.
Sweet.
Wow.
What a
Okay,
win.
sorry for interrupting you there, Mike.
No, that's
Carry
okay.
on, please carry on.
Okay, cool. And then finally, just for producers, we wanted to basically make it so that moving forward, we had a standard approach to deploying applications, right? And we wanted to do this via the template feature in Backstage. Then, in addition to that, we wanted feedback for producers and consumers, right? So as a consumer, you want to know what the rating of that tool, service, or API is, so that you can tell whether it's something that's good that you want to consume. And of course, as a producer of those tool, services, or APIs, we want to get feedback from our customers to know what's working and what's not, so we can make a better product for our consumers. And then finally, from a transparency perspective, we wanted to provide transparency into things like availability, quality, and performance for an application. We wanted to provide DevOps metrics associated to that application. And then finally, we wanted to provide an executive view, which is basically a real-time aggregation for a domain and capability, so that an executive can come in and say, well, hey, what are all the tools and services that exist in my domain? What is the cost of that domain? What are my security risks for that domain? So on and so forth. And so Backstage provides us with that platform to go and do that for Expedia executives, which is great. And so all of these things to say, we started out with this notion of doing tools and Techdocs for Backstage, and it's grown into basically our entire ecosystem. And that's what's been really cool. That's the story. And so just to tell you where we've gotten our development cycle, I'm going to turn this over to Guillermo, and he's going to talk about where we are and where we're headed.
Awesome, thanks, Mike. So as Mike already mentioned, he's on the product side, and he did all this. Him and his team went out and did all this investigation and understanding to help guide the tech on making our first decision on what developer portal to focus on. And it looks like we had chosen Backstage for our POC. When I say POC, as we first started with documentation discovery, and as Mike mentioned, went into tools, and now has exploded into the whole developer ecosystem. So going on towards that POC, we went through quite a bit of struggles, right? Kind of understanding what it means to adopt an open source project, not just adopting the open source project, but one in its early phase. So essentially, we're like one of the first ones in. So not just on the adoption side, we're also wanting to contribute. So between the POC and the MVP that we did in Q1, we actually put a lot of focus on understanding what the outside community cares about and how they go about contributing to Backstage within open source. So during that POC time and MVP time, we actually did put in quite a bit of effort to get ourselves in there and get our feet wet within the Backstage community. So as you can see, we have made a couple of contributions, including our, for the software templates, the scaffolder, you'll see the search and filtering. That's one of our Backstage EG contributions that we were able to get through during our POC and MVP phase. Of course, then comes the eternal part, right? So as we're doing all this, there's the two-sided prong with Mike and the product team working with us to try to evangelize Backstage across EG, which has been an interesting topic, an area to tackle, because as Lee had already mentioned, it's quite difficult to touch upon working on an internal developer portal and also be able to try to contribute to an external developer portal, which can sometimes cause friction because we need to decide which one to contribute to first and which one's most valuable to us right now. But as you can see, this is all in the early phases, right? We just got started. So it's great that we're having these conversations now. So we hope to work with the community to get a better understanding as to how the other companies and adopters are tackling Backstage internally and externally. And so we're hoping to become active maintainers. And what that means really is we want to follow the open source model and actually have individuals contribute directly to Backstage, be a part of the main maintainer team, and be able to provide more guidance back to Expedia Group. Also, we want to be able to partner with other leaders, as I already mentioned, that are already adopting Backstage internally. Next slide, please. All right, so obviously, Backstage is awesome. That's why we have it across EG. We're going to continue putting our effort in expanding that ecosystem across all our other brands and hopefully unifying all the tool sets that we have. Obviously, during the POC time, we actually needed Spotify Backstage team quite a bit, and they were a great help with getting us ramped up and understanding how the Backstage ecosystem works just a little bit internally, as well as how we can help contribute to the OSS community. And then, as I already stated, we want to partner with anybody who's already leveraging Backstage internally and hoping to open to hear any new ideas. And if you have any, please do reach out to us backstage@expediagroup.com.
Cool. Thanks,
happy to hear any questions if you have any.
So we've got one question just come through from Adam. How many entities do you manage in EG Backstage today?
I would say so about 20,000 plus to what Mike had already called out. So that number is consistently growing, and it's coming to a point where we have to understand what's the logical breakdown within the Backstage ecosystem and how to ensure our customers, which are developers, are able to find that data as quickly as we are exposing it.
Cool. And Pete asks, how are you hosting Expedia Group Backstage in production?
We're currently hosting it in the cloud.
Okay. David, what is Expedia's plan for driving Backstage adoption across the company and encouraging usage?
Yeah, there's two pieces to that. One, we are really fortunate in the sense that we're on a big push from our CEO to do API first and to really deduplicate these applications and services. So we were really lucky in the sense that we have executive buy-in on this, and they've basically said, hey, this Backstage is the portal that you need to go and use, and that's where you need to onboard your APIs, tools, and services. So we got a bit of a break there. And then in addition to that, what we're also doing in parallel with that, because we have executive sponsorship, is we're taking some of these sort of custom one-off portals that do things like, we've got a Spinnaker portal that does just a deployment, right? It's just Spinnaker, but it's not integrated in any one situation. It's not integrated within Backstage yet. And so the intent is to take away all these sort of custom built solutions and basically use Backstage as the holistic developer ecosystem. So those are the two things we're doing. Is essentially we've got good support from our leadership, which is awesome, and then we're retiring any kind of non-Backstage type solutions.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Mike, Erica, and Guillermo there. Please, obviously,
Absolutely.
people keep adding questions as we go through, and we'll try to get to them too. Okay, cool. Thank you, guys. That was super interesting. Okay, I'm going to jump us across to the issue because we have a few topics and questions that were raised there. So the one with the most upvotes we have is here. So this one is from Stefan. As shown below, the project is moving at high pace. I wonder if there is anything we as a community can do to help you, the maintainers, to make your life easier, besides using the search. Posted with this image. So I'm going to pass that over to the maintainers to answer.
I guess I can start by saying that the help and feedback from the community in terms of responding to things on issues and on Discord and so on has been absolutely brilliant. So already that is a massive amount of help to help field questions and get people going and point to right places in documentation. But also in keeping us on our toes, right? Making these issues and pointing out bugs and helping keep things clean. Really enjoying it. We're doing good stuff.
I'd like to kind of, if I may, flip that question a little bit on its head. And while we have a big chunk of the community here with us, is there anything that you want to see from us in that kind of community support, community interaction? Are there better ways that we can be communicating around some of these things with everybody?
I guess for me, some help that I think would be necessary would be around how can we, if necessary, sometimes internal we'll need to customize a plugin that we may not want to customize, but the functionality may not be present within open source. Is there a way for us to get support on, having that customization and coming back to us as when the contribution is complete, or kind of really opening up the contributions in a way where we can contribute without having too much friction across the community, i.e. we're not in everybody's way as we're trying to build this one piece of functionality.
I'm going to pass that back to the maintainers again to get their opinions.
My question was: is there any plans to support kind of branching out the plugins into their own repos so that we're able to customize on a plugin basis?
Most definitely. So our plan has always been to not have all of the plugins in the main repo. Eventually, maybe we don't have any plugins in the main repo, and that's remains to be seen. We have them there for kind of refactoring purposes and being able to do sweeping changes more easily as we're in kind of early stages. And the more stable we get, the more, the less friction there will be to have plugins outside of the main repo. So I think we'll start seeing some more of that soon. We're making some changes to the core API that will let you kind of not be forced to always be on the latest version of things, which I think can help that piece a lot.
Awesome, thank you.
Okay, let's jump on to another one in the repo, in the issue, sorry. So looking for some updates, perhaps updates, and this is from Andrew, perhaps updates and or discussions on some of the major RFCs in progress. For example, we have the RFCs on identity to ownership, future Kubernetes plugin contributions, and simplifying Techdocs as the three called out. To the maintainers, which one would you like to tackle first? And I'll pull up the RFC.
Let's just go from the top, right?
Go from the top? Okay.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Yep. So this is a big one, long-standing one. I think we have a pretty good plan of what to do here, actually. So after settling it all, I think we agreed on a way forward where we make it essentially not strictly necessary to use groups and users in the database to fulfill the ownership sort of chain. And also a way of conveying that through the auth tokens. So what's missing here is just to tie up the final pieces. Essentially, we have been making a big push lately to finalize the shape of the scaffolder and currently the catalog and some other core pieces. So it's mostly in limbo just because of essential time. You know, we haven't gotten the time to tie up the final little pieces there yet. But we have done some prep work in the auth backend to make this pluggable in the way that it needs to be, but a little bit left to do. Anything you want to fill in there, Patrick?
And indeed, it's kind of the auth backend that needs a bit of work on in how it's configured, and making the distinction between signing in and kind of accessing OAuth and delegating access to third-party resources a bit more clear.
Yeah, okay, so moving on to the second one, which is future Kubernetes plugin contributions. So this one's actually kind of owned and managed by another team. I don't know if Matt's on the call, actually. If he is, that would be amazing if he could speak to. If not, I'm going to pass again to the maintainers.
And I worked with Matt on this quite a bit, and to be honest, this can in many ways be closed as less of an RFC and more of a list of future features to implement. It's in many ways mostly settled and in RFC format to be open for discussion. Work is kind of continuing towards this as its own pace. I believe the team worked on some features last week to start supporting CRDs in a better way. Yep. But
yeah,
indeed,
that got
as you
merged.
said, it is a separate team.
Yeah, that got merged last week. So CRDs are supported now. And
cool.
What did he add? Argo CD, I think. The Argo pipelines, rollouts and stuff give a nice customized view now in Backstage. So you can actually see the progression of a rollout in Argo CD. Yeah.
This is one of those RFC that's perfect to move over to the discussions and be more of a discussion forum of new features to add to the Kubernetes plugin.
Okay, cool. And the last one that was called out in this list, simplifying Techdocs front-end architecture. And I'm going to pass this straight to Himanshu, actually.
Yeah, so this is closed now. We decided to stick around with the current architecture that we have for Techdocs, which is to use mkdocs to build a page and then kind of embed it inside Backstage and not go the fundamental way of injecting content, because it might be too much of a work and we'll be missing out a bunch of mkdocs extensions, which are pretty cool. So for now, we are sticking with the current architecture, but this will eventually lead to a more open Techdocs where you don't need mkdocs or you don't need Markdown per se, and you can use anything. But it's certainly a future work.
Do you mind if I ask a mechanics questions about the RFCs?
Sure.
So obviously there's a lot of great dialogue through many of these. Does the core team sort of meet offline and then to say we'll create a milestone or like a tracking ticket with that checklist to nail all the points that are discussed in the RFC, or what do you do after the feedback is sort of collected?
So I can try and take a little stab at answering this. I mean, I think it works differently for different RFCs. I can speak to one that I did for the scaffolder. So when we did the scaffolder V1, it was kind of an MVP. So we opened up an RFC to gather feedback from the community about how they thought it was working, what was missing. And we had a lot of great discussion inside the RFC about proposals for a new API and what to do next, basically. And then we kept the RFC open for quite a while to kind of gather some feedback from the community and from also internal, other teams that were also using the scaffolder internally at Spotify and stuff, well, like the Techdocs part of things too, to see how they fit together. And then kind of when we got to the end of the RFC, we kind of collected all the feedback together, posted back some comments about saying we'll break this down into all the tickets, and then we met to kind of plan next steps for it. I think it differs depending on the RFC about who's going to build it and what's the scope of what we're going to actually do. I don't know if any of the other maintainer wants to jump in there and say something different, but I think it depends on the RFC. I don't really think there's a set pattern.
Maybe that's something that could be crystallized more as time goes on, if it's desirable that we have clear patterns for this to make sure that we sort of leave a trail of the outcomes of these RFCs, the actual artifacts produced and so on. But for now, yeah, it's a little bit ad hoc, I guess. Hopefully, I mean, like we said, the one with the scaffolder and also the auth one, they turn out almost like work orders in the end, right? A long discussion, in the end resulting in like, hey, let's do it this way, and then we sort of do it that way. But sometimes that ends up in a milestone, but sometimes it's more of like, yeah, just it's done. Hopefully.
I think in many ways,
I think it relates to the other topic, the first one we had about how can we help. That if we knew that it's spread out, then that allows us as the community to kind of jump in and help nail some of those sort of subtasks.
Okay, we have about 5 minutes to go, so I'm just going to move on from this one right now. Himanshu, you had what I think is an interesting question for the community, which is tips and tricks of contributing to Backstage and seeing if people want to share. Is that right?
Yeah, because Backstage is adding around 6 new contributors every week, and it's such a massive project. So that I thought, let's discuss like what are your what's the key secret of contributing to Backstage? And for me, it's just running it, make sure things are not breaking, and when I make my PR, is a good confidence before I submit my pull request. So that's one tip, is that make sure to do yarn dev and open up a page, and it just loads. But anyone else, yes, feel free to like add your own thoughts in the comment or turn on your audio. Having an app config local.yaml is another one for your own secrets.
I can take a stab. I do a few things. I have a .m files, and I use .mvrc to manage secrets. I have back and forth between the open source version and our internal version, and also have some scripts that I kind of like use to populate the catalog. I kind of reset my DBs, like just dump them. Sometimes there's migration issues, and then some scripts to kind of like load up, some entities that I know kind of work and want to test with. So as far as getting test data, so that's kind of worked out pretty well. So
I know from my perspective, I have an app config local with a local Postgres and Docker that has all of my sample, resources that I pulled from various parts where we're testing it. And I just, we'll switch back and forth between branches or like pull from upstream. And like I tested the recent to-do plugin, which is super cool, by the way, love it. And just pulled that branch down to my local yarn dev it, and then it just pulls off of all my existing content. So I like to switch between that to kind of test what's coming in and then contribute back to those branches.
Another one for plugins when developing a plugin is to use the dev setup of only kind of serving the plugin itself for front-end plugins. So the dev folder and the index file there, setting up a couple of pages, mocking some API perhaps. You can like set up multiple different pages if you want to test different scenarios. And there's a couple of examples in the main repo, plenty of the plugins. And I use that pattern for working on a plugin in isolation.
I've actually never understood that pattern, Patrick. I would love someone to maybe elaborate on how to do that, because I've never done that still.
I think the documentation can need some work there. We'll see if we can get something in.
Okay, so we're actually almost at time. So again, just to say a huge thank you to all of you for helping to make this a really awesome community and helping the Backstage project move forward as it has been, and hopefully will continue to. Thank you to Mike and Guillermo and Eric from Expedia for sharing your kind of experiences there and giving us a sneak peek into how you went about it and what's going on. Thank you for Tyson for speaking too, and then for everybody for contributing to this great community session. Again, we're going to be back next month with our next one. in the meantime, you'll see the new GitHub issue, or maybe it'll be a discussion, I don't know. But you'll see the new things come up for the community meeting next time, so you can start adding to the agenda. And also, if you have a few minutes, we would love to hear your feedback for these sessions and how we can make them better. So I've just posted the doc to a Google form that we have to try and gather some of that feedback into chat. So thank you again, all. Keep being awesome, and we'll see you all soon.